Hi, I'm Oliver, and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. Another month, another load of releases, of course. I can't say I was massively blown away by the quality or the quantity of the quality that we got in October. Probably the weakest month of the year, I would say, in terms of releases, but nevertheless, still some interesting things to talk about. I also haven't included as many reviews as I normally do, partly because I've just been so busy I haven't had a chance to listen to things in depth to the point where I feel like I could write a review and talk about it in a reviewing capacity. So hopefully when we get to November, I will have listened to more albums and we'll be back to normal somewhat. Here we go. Iglooghost, Neo Wax Bloom. This actually came out on the last Friday of September, so what, the 29th of September or something, but there's been a lot of buzz and online attention about this record, so I thought it would definitely be worth discussing on the video today. Honestly, when I first saw his artwork, I was convinced that he was from the Orange Milk Records label because the artwork is so similar. It really uses digital and vibrant colours, but no, that apparently that's just a coincidence. But he has a very vibrant album cover regardless. Iglooghost is the work of Seamus Mallia, a very talented young electronic producer who, despite being around for a very short period of time, is already making a name for himself. So Neo Wax Bloom, Iglooghost's first full-length LP, arrives on Flying Lotus's Brain Feeder label, so that's quite a big platform for him to have in the electronic music world. He did have an EP that was released back in 2015 that was also on Brain Feeder, and that kind of gave us an idea of this guy's talents. Seamus's musical style takes on a number of different expressions and really creates what I can only describe as bricolage, so a tapestry of sounds and rhythms presenting themselves to you at such a speed on a first listen that you're wondering what the hell's going on and you really do struggle to take it all in. Seamus takes the complex rhythmic focus of a style like Footwork, but then also melds that with a style like Wonky, which, yes, that is actually a subgenre, Wonky. It's essentially a style that utilizes rhythms a lot, but it switches up focus continuously, so it sort of barrages the listener. There's left and right turns abound as you listen to that Wonky style along with the Footwork. It's very unstable and unpredictable, but there's also a focus of synth expression as well, sort of mid-range synths. That's very much a sound of that wonky subgenre of electronic music. So that's key to this sound and this style that Seamus is going for. And Seamus takes these ideas and manages to make something that is so much fun. The almost ska-like saxophone line that leads sub-bass grooving track Super Ink Burst, chipmunk vocals weaving in and out of these crisp percussion samples, that bouncy track Bug Thief constantly throwing in these infectious rhythmic and melodic gems will have you replaying this album cover to cover over and over again. I especially want to mention a track like Purity Shards, for example. So yes, comparatively short to the rest of the album, it's almost like an interlude compared to some of the more barraging tracks like Bug Thief, for example. But it also reveals the strength of Seamus's production when he pulls back on that intensity a little bit. The way he plays with the depth of the production, the textures that he uses, he really knows how to create a soundscape that's fun, but also intricate as well. This is a good release. I think there's a lot more in store from Seamus, and he's actually recently announced on Twitter a few days ago that he's been working on 2 new albums at once, so I think he's going to be quite prolific with his output, but I hope it stays at this quality, and I hope he's able to push this quality up as well, because this is an exciting piece of work. Beck Colors. This is a bit sterile, isn't it? Beck is an artist with a discography that gets split in half in my head. We have the Beck that created the weird and wonderful records like Odelay back in the 90s, and then that critical Grammy darling of the 21st century who creates predictable, borderline tiring albums that I personally couldn't care less about. Beck's previous record Morning Phase was met with critical acclaim and 3 Grammys, and I'm not sure why. I listen to it and I think, why has this garnered so much praise? Why has this received 3 Grammys? But then I do also remember that the Grammys is a complete waste of time and not indicative of quality work by any stretch of the imagination at all. So there is that. Colors leaves me feeling cold in exactly the same way that Beck's Morning Phase album did too. Straight off the bat, the title and opening track, Colors, reveals the very crisp and clean production courtesy of Beck himself and also Greg Kurstin, who has worked with Beck before, but he's also worked with people like Adele, Kelly Clarkson, Pink, Foo Fighters. It's in that pristine cleanliness that any spark of potential just gets rubbed away. I mean, I don't think Colors is a bad track per se, but in this iteration, it's just completely forgettable. Imagine this track a bit rough around the edges with, I don't know, distorted drums or some kind of obscure instrument weaving its way through the track. It sounds so uninspired and unexplored as an idea, and for me, that is this record in a nutshell. I'm So Free is some kind of attempt at a quirky rock anthem with these distorted guitars that are so compressed they almost sound like this synthetic keyboard tone. Just puts me off completely. What about the trap-flavoured track, Wow? Ew. This track is so ill-advised. I don't know what Beck was thinking when he put this on this record. It sounds like a granddad trying to get down with the kids. That's what it sounds like. It's a parody almost, but when put in the context of this album, it can't be a parody because nothing else on here is a parody. I don't think. I mean, it's all bad, but I don't think it's a parody. But it just, if anybody else had done it, I think it would be heralded as a joke. But because Beck's done it, somehow this track's clever. Nah. By the time I'd reached the track Square One, I was well and truly done with this record. But I did soldier on and listen to it a number of times for this review. It's not a good record. I wouldn't, if you've never listened to Beck before, I wouldn't recommend touching this record or even the previous record. I'd suggest going back to the early 90s to some of his other records. But yeah, I mean, just not a very good album. King Krule, The Ooze. That's 2 for 2 with King Krule. Man, oh man. Archie Marshall is the man behind the music of King Krule. He's a 23-year-old musician from London who might just, perhaps, be the voice of a generation. I completely rate this guy. Making his name well and truly with 2013's debut record, 6 Feet Beneath the Moon, a really brilliant record, and that record stood out to me for a number of different reasons. One of them was Marshall's laconic, drooling British vocals that often burst into these impassioned barks, and other times it was this low growl that would sound close to something like Tom Waits or Nick Cave. And then the other part of it is these incredibly eclectic influences that he draws together in his songwriting. You have things like surf rock, post-punk, these major seventh chords that give a jazzy feel to the stuff that he's writing, splurges of saxophone, garage and hip-hop influences. A melting pot in the truest sense, and on this second record, The Ooze, Marshall does a very similar thing, except this time the record drips and pools in the cracks in the pavement. The ooze kind of collects bits of dirt and grime as it runs along the ground, and it creates this woozy journey of sadness but also intrigue. Woozy is definitely the best word to describe this fantastic record. Right off the bat, you have opening track Biscuit Town, which begins the record with this understated, clean guitar part and this wonky drum pattern, and Marshall's creating this picture of contemporary society amidst adolescent fears. Fuck, that's Coca-Cola, as TV sports the Olympic Ebola. I think we might be bipolar. I think she thinks I'm bipolar. He left the crime scene without the Motorola. Still had the dreams of being young Franco Zola. A track like Locomotive shows how Marshall creates these unique environments with these various sonic styles. So on this track you have these percussive bells that ring throughout the track alongside these unsettling chord progressions in the chorus. Everything rings out and the reverb plays such a large part of creating this tangibly unsettling feeling. Other times in tracks there is a percussive backline, but it's not allowed to take center stage. Marshall makes sure it's pulled back a little bit, so on the track Logos, for example, this plinking sample beat sounds dazed and confused. It's so far away, it drips like a tap actually. I'd be interested to know if that's a kind of sample that he used. But next to Marshall's deep drool and expressive synths, it really does just create this fascinating mood. The production on Check One is phenomenal. It's these dual vocals that are whispering across this fragile scape that's been created. It's comforting, but as with everything else on this record, something feels off. It's almost as if the fragility of this record threatens to collapse in on itself. I think that's a big thing that Marshall's harnessing on this record, is this idea that everything at any point could collapse. And in a way, perhaps it already is collapsing, and we're already oozing on into the void, as it were. There have been cries by some critics and music fans at the indulgence of this record. The word indulgence specifically has been used. An unfocused writing style that Marshall's going for. I really do not hear that. I feel like every single moment of this record entirely captivates me. Marshall puts me into the sordid, dim world of King Krule wholly, and I cannot personally get enough of it. I think he is an absolute talent, and this is album of the month for me, and this is probably one of the best albums I've heard this year. And so I watch you from afar, the Endless Shimmering. So the fifth album from instrumental post-rock band And So I Watch You From Afar. I really liked their second album, Gangs, so much so that I actually included it on my post-rock video that I recorded, my 5 albums to get you into post-rock, which I recorded way back now in July 2016, which feels like a long time ago. The second video I ever did on this channel. Anyway, I really appreciate their dynamism as a group, but also their ability to create playful yet epic sounding music. I feel like there's a real issue with a lot of instrumental post-rock bands to take themselves a little bit too seriously. They create a little bit too much dramatic weight and it almost comes across as pompous. And I don't think And So I Watch You From Afar have ever done that. Certainly on their record Gangs, it's so much fun to listen to. It's a bit like if you've ever listened to a post-rock band, instrumental post-rock band called Brontide, they're very similar in that way as well, I think. And Gangs really was a great record. But since that album, I can't help but feel that they're just stuck in the same gear. It's not like their subsequent third and fourth albums were particularly bad. They just felt a little bit tired and a little bit uncreative. It almost feels as if they've kind of taken their sound as far as it can possibly go, and everything else is just an iteration of the previous album or the previous track, which isn't particularly interesting to listen to. Sadly, that's exactly what the Endless Shimmering sounds like to me. A collection of competent instrumental post-rock songs that make for an enjoyable, if heavily deja vu listen. At times this just feels like a cover album of all the best bits of post-rock and math rock all sort of mashed together. With sections of these clean, noodly guitar parts on the track, a slow unfolding of wings. It just sounds straight out of This Town Needs Guns playbook. It just sounds so similar to that style. You can't help but feel they're kind of aping off of that sound a little bit. Moments of slow building, muscular yet melancholy guitar work, these crescendos that are just 10 a penny in this genre, so it has to be something really special, I think, these days to rise above the obvious cliche of instrumental post-rock, and again most of the time on this record they are not able to do that. I really wanted to like this album because in so many ways I cut my teeth on this style of music, math rock and post-rock. It's music that really helped me appreciate the instrumental part of creating music. There's no focus on vocals, so you have to create and express mood in a completely different way. And there are moments on this that almost kind of pushed through the very average feeling of this record. There was that groove on the track Dying Giants. It had these vibrato broken guitar chords, a very intricate drum pattern, and you know, who doesn't love an intricate drum pattern in a post-rock track? But it wasn't enough to elevate this record. Other moments feel so by the numbers, they just don't have any identity. For example, the title track is just so straightforward to its detriment, absolutely. If you're looking for music of this ilk, I would suggest you checking out a record like Gangs, which And So I Watch You From Afar released back in 2011, a very good record. Really not feeling this one, unfortunately. Kelela, Take Me Apart. Okay, when I said this month was weak in terms of album releases, I did forget to mention that there's two very clear frontrunners for album of the month this month. One of them being obviously the wonderful King Krule record that I've already spoken about in detail, and then we've got Kelela's first full-length album, which is a beautiful collision of R&B and modern electronic sounds, which is spearheaded by Kelela's powerful lyrical presence. Kelela made a bit of a name for herself back in 2013 with a Cut For Me mixtape that she released, and she's also been guesting on various projects since then, and definitely her name's been getting out there more. I really remember taking notice of her back when Clams Casino released his 32 Levels record, and she was the guest feature on the track A Breath Away, I think and it was definitely a highlight of the album, and I remember thinking that's a really powerful voice. So I was looking forward to this release, but I didn't think it was going to be the engrossing, cohesive listen that it turned out to be. Every one of the 14 tracks on Take Me Apart is crisp and tasty. It's produced and designed to please your ears and your mind. Moments of sub-bass grooving on a track like Waiting, or the gorgeous, sultry ballad Take Me Apart, which is of course the title track. I think it was at this point on the first listen that I realised I was listening to something really special. The percussion has this experimental quality to it in the chorus. It's all mids and bass, and it kind of flits across the landscape. It's unorthodox for an album that takes R&B and modern electronic. It has a level of intelligence to it, to the design of it, and it really engrosses you. And it kind of reminds me, it's not dissimilar to the way Iglooghost approaches an album, although that's much more off the wall and crazy. This is a little bit more crowd pleasing, I suppose, because of the style of music that's being made. But it's those little flourishes, those little tasty details in the production that really just make this such a brilliant listen. It's Kelela's approach to the tracks that gives this whole album the sultry quality that it has. making her sexual power such a big part of her lyricism. On SOS, for example, she's trying to seduce a lover to come over for a booty call, and these reverse cymbals and swelling synth notes create this passionate tactility to the entire track. It's very intimate, and that intimacy, sexual intimacy, is what comes across, and it kind of powers through this entire record. One of my favourite tracks is track 6, Better, where Kelela wrestles with breaking up with a partner. And as with everything else on this album, the production is carefully placed around Kelela's vocal presence, knowing that it is her story, and the space created around her is very intimate. It again adds to that feeling of intimacy on this record, and to the narratives that she's creating. I think the narratives are quite important here. Sometimes you feel as if she's singing to you and you alone, or you're reading a diary and it's so personal you feel as if you shouldn't be listening. And I think sometimes it's very hard to harness that kind of intimacy on a record, but it's done here with such grace and dignity and sexuality. It's a really great record. If you have any taste for R&B and electronic music, you need to get stuck into this. St. Vincent, Masseduction. St. Vincent is of course the project of Annie Clark, an artist who has released a number of great albums over the years, such as Strange Mercy, her 4th LP as well, 2013, self-titled, a very good album. Her songwriting style has been critically acclaimed for taking left turns and injecting experimental inflections into her powerful and often gripping songwriting. So we arrive in 2017 to her pop album, Masseduction, an album that certainly to me feels dead on arrival. A pristine, overproduced work that for me fails to capture the ragged emotion that's usually so prescient in Clark's work. Now you could argue this approach is very much part of the point and the concept of this record. You know, if you can't see the themes of commodified, packaged female sexuality in 2017 in the cover art and the title alone, well, you know, look harder. And so this robotic synthetic style in theory works to disperse this theme, but sometimes a concept doesn't necessarily make for the best listening experience. There are moments on here where the bubblegum pop sound that Clark is going for is contradicted with these sharp, dark little moments in lyricism, which is really good. It works well. Like on Pills, for example, where the lyrics of the chorus reference all of the different things that pills can be used for, and it's kind of a dark comment on society, commodification once again, the fact that we all have to rely on narcotics and different drugs in order to survive in this world. There's some interesting themes going on there. I guess for me, there weren't enough moments like that to cut through the dull, flat pop sound that's presented to us here. Track Sugar Boy has a kaleidoscopic, colourful fun to it, and the driving synth backline clearly harks back to 80s chart hits. I quite enjoyed that track. In other places, the piano ballad New York feels like such a waste of space. Like, I don't really know why it was included on this record. It seems to be out of place. I know that producer Jack Antonoff worked on this track, and he has a real thing for theatrical piano ballads. He worked on Lord's Melodrama, for example, and there's one track on there that sticks out as clearly an Antonoff influence, I think. But it worked better in context of that record, I think. In the context of Melodrama, that worked. But this just feels needless and uninspired, this track. It's such a dead cut that it could just be cut out because it's not needed here. The entire idea and concept just feels directionless to me, and the individual tracks don't do enough for me to suggest that the overall project might be greater than the sum of its parts. In the end, this is just not a very good album. Fever Ray, Plunge. So Fever Ray, second Fever Ray album. We've had nothing from her since 2009's debut record. Very, very good self-titled record. I thought it was great, but 8 years, that's a long time. Fever Ray is the moniker of Corinne Dreyer, who used to be one half of the duo The Knife, and I'm sure most of you will have come across the Knife before. Were a fantastic electronic group disbanded in 2014, I think, and they've gave us some real gems of the millennium so far. We have albums like Silent Shout, Shaking the Habitual, Deep Cuts. Fever Ray's dramatic and shape-shifting electronic pop music has previously contained slivers of the Knife's approach to creating soundscapes and evoking these similar moods, and thankfully what Dreyer manages to do with Plunge after this very long hiatus is continue retaining that dramatic quality to her music, and I'm really glad she was able to do that, using all manner of intriguing electronic sounds that complement her volatile and dynamic vocals. Vocally, she jumps from impassioned to soothing, even mechanical through the track A Part of Us, and vocoder pierces through this electronic scape which pulsates, and it almost evokes a heart monitor. The idea of digital equipment. It sort of pulsates through this entire record anyway, but this track particularly, you have this constant beeping sound which does evoke like a heart rate monitor or something medical. True to Fever Ray fashion, this record released days before Halloween, and that feels apt because there's a very dark theatrical quality to the music that's created on this record. It was there with her self-titled, and it's here again in Plunge. The opening track, Wanna Sip's descending synth samples sound like a rocket on a downward trajectory or something, and the bass on the bass drum shakes the foundations of the track. It's quite menacing in its attack on the listener, as Dryer orates her lyrics with that yelping sort of method. Inevitably, with the level of quality that Dryer's built up with her self-titled record and also the Knife's discography, there's a level of expectation going into listening to this record. I feel like on the whole, Plunge meets those expectations, yet there are also times where I feel as if I want to be more drawn into the music. You want to feel more intimate and less disconnected, because occasionally there's a bit of a disconnect, I think, with the audience and the music that's being created. Tracks like To the Moon and Back and also An Itch, they're fun cuts, but I find myself wanting to get deeper into Drea's personality and her thoughts. And I think sometimes tracks like that are surface level enjoyable, but I want a little bit more from them. But all in all, I enjoyed this record. Right, that was my October 2017 album review roundup. Thank you for watching. I apologise that I only reviewed 7 albums this month. I just haven't had enough time to put my thoughts together on any more records. I did listen to Caitlin Aurelia Smith's The Kid. I listened to Destroyer's Ken. I've also listened to Alex Cameron's Force Witness. So there are other albums that I've listened to. I just haven't had time to put my thoughts together on them. So hopefully in November I will have had a little bit more time. Come and join us on the Deep Cuts Discord at 10 o'clock tomorrow GMT, because British summertime is now over. So 10 o'clock GMT, we're going to be listening to King Krule's The Ooze in full. So if you haven't heard that album and you'd like to experience it with a bunch of other music fans and music lovers, then please come and join us, because we always have a lot of fun. I won't be back next week because there is a certain high-profile album release coming out towards the end of November that everyone's very excited for, and I have a guide prepared for said artist, and I know you all know who this is, so I don't know why I'm not saying the name, but it just feels more fun. So I'm going to take a week off next week to write that guide, and I'll be back in 2 weeks' time with that guide in preparation for the new album. So thank you for watching. I'll see you in a fortnight.